Hello and welcome to another edition of On Our Terms, a video series by AIA Contract Documents. In this video, we're going to be talking about the contractor's duty to perform the work in accordance with the contract documents. My name is Mike Koger and I'm joined by my colleague Jimmy Germano. We're both staff attorneys for the American Institute of Architects in Washington, D.C., and we work in the Contract Documents Department. As always, we can't give legal advice on this video, and nothing that you hear in this video is a substitute for consulting with an attorney who is licensed in your jurisdiction who can talk with you about the specific issues that you're facing. And with that, Jimmy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. So, like you said, today we're going to be talking about 3.1.2, and 3.1.2 is one of the shortest clauses in the entire A201. And the A201 is 38 pages long or something. It's a long document. There's a lot of terms and conditions to it. Section 3.1.2 is 12 words long, but it is one of, if not the most critical clause in the entire document, which is a little counterintuitive, right? And I was trying to think, before we recorded this, I was trying to think of like a good analogy to sort of frame why this is so important. And the way I think of it is like if you knew nothing else about the A201, you could come close to boiling down the entire agreement to this one short sentence. And it's similar. I'm a fan of golf, so it's similar. If you read the first rule of golf, all it says is you have to use a club and you have to play the ball as it lies. And if you kind of knew nothing else about the sport, that would really get you started enough where you could go play. And then let's figure out the nuances later. And that's sort of how I think about this clause is the contractor shall perform the work in accordance with the contract documents. And there's so much there that we're not going to be able to get into nearly, a 10% of really what this clause means. You would need 3 hours to do that. But we're going to at least introduce why this is so important and how it works. So the first thing to understand about section 3.1.2 is you'll notice that there's 4 words, well there's 5, but the first "the" doesn't really count. There's 4 words that are capitalized in this sentence, and there's a video that we did publish already about the capitalization of terms and why that's important and how that works. So the first thing to understand is that the term contractor is defined elsewhere. It's in section 3.1.1 of the A201. The term work is defined in 1.1.3. So already you're tying in 2 other clauses within the A201. So the contractor, as the contractor is defined in 3.1.1. And 3.1.1 is just right above 3.1.2, obviously, but it's a long clause. And it sort of just outlines who the contractor is and how that term is being used. Shall perform the work is capitalized, and work is defined again in 1.1.3, and work is defined in 1.1.3 as the construction and services required by the contract documents, whether completed or partially completed, and includes all other labor, materials, equipment, and services provided or to be provided by the contractor to fulfill the contractor's obligations, and the work may constitute the whole or a part of the project. So already you're starting to see this 3.1.2 expand a little bit by incorporating 2 other sections. So understanding, again, the contractor is defined and work is defined a certain way. Then you move forward in the sentence and you get really to the meat of what this sentence is all about, and you see the phrase contract documents is capitalized. Contract documents is defined in section 1.1.1 of the A201. That may tip you off a little bit to the fact that it's the very first clause of the A201, I believe, 1.1.1. So again, it might be pretty important. It's the very first thing you hit. So it's important to understand, to take a step back for a second and understand what this clause is saying. And big picture terms, it's saying what the contractor has to do, period. If there is an A201 in place on your project and you go to 3.1.2, it answers the question of, I'm the contractor, what do I have to do? If a contractor looks at that and wants to answer that question, they have to perform the work, as we already defined, in accordance with the contract documents. That's why it's important to understand why the term contract documents is used and why it is incredibly important to understand what the contract documents are. So with that, we're going to move into just a quick analysis of what the contract documents are. We've already done this in a lot more detail in another video. It's on our YouTube page, so if you can check that out. The contract documents include, just very quickly, assuming you're using an A101, A201 framework for your project. It includes the agreement, the conditions of the contract, whether they're general, supplementary, other, etc., the drawings, your specifications, addenda, other documents that you might list in your agreement, modifications, and anything else that's listed in the A101 Article 9. And you look at this on the screen, you start to see this web of information, these documents that are being incorporated by reference into the phrase contract documents. So you begin to see how 3.1.2 is 12 words, but if you were to really extend it out to its fullest meaning, it would have to read something like the contractor, as that term is defined in 3.1.1, shall perform the work, as that term is defined, in accordance with the agreement, the conditions, the drawings, the specifications, the addenda, the mods, like all that stuff extended all the way out. And that's why it becomes clear to see that 3.1.2 can get very complicated. Something else to understand here, to take a pause for a second, is when you start to see this sort of this web of other documents that are incorporated by reference into the contract documents, you can see why Section 1.2, which is entitled Correlation and Intent of Contract Documents, you can see why that's so important to understand and how that ties into this concept. We've already recorded a video on that that clause. It's entitled, Why is there no order of precedence in AIA contracts? Again, that can be found on our YouTube page. But it's important to understand that when the contractor is performing the work in accordance with the contract documents, it's performing the work in accordance with all of these other documents put together, tied in together, and looked at a certain way such that you have to understand if there's a discrepancy between two of them, how that works, etc. So again, not that many words in 3.1.2, but a whole lot of concepts built into this clause, and much to understand with respect to, again, if you could boil down the A201 essentially into one clause, I think there's a good argument to be made that this is the one that sort of encapsulates all of the intent of the A201. And with that, I'll kind of start to wrap up, unless, Mike, did I hit everything? Do you have any questions? I know I didn't hit everything, because I don't think anybody can do that. But
yeah, I don't have any questions, but I think this is a good section. Well, it's just a sentence to talk about in a video, even though it's it's incredibly simple. It is the primary action item for the contractor. So in one sentence, it wraps up a whole lot of ideas and a whole lot of things. And it I think this could while it is in Article 3, it could very well be item 1.1, because everything kind of flows from it. It just takes me back, looking at this sentence, it takes me back to days when I used to do construction defect litigation, and in every dispute that you have for an owner arguing that the contractor has failed to do something, has made a mistake or whatever, it always starts out, while you might have more nuanced arguments down the road, everything starts out with your pleadings, all of your anything making that argument starts out with this sentence: the contractor shall perform the work in accordance with the contract documents, and here's what the contract document said, and here's how they didn't comply with that. So incredibly important sentence, very easy to overlook, but it's definitely worth highlighting. So I appreciate it. Yeah.
I completely agree. I mean, this is sort of where you have to start in any type of analysis. If there is a claim or something like that, or an issue, a disagreement on the project, this is almost sort of naturally where you have to start. And it can get a little bit more complicated. On the bottom right-hand corner of the screen there, anything else listed in the A101 Article 9, you have to reference back and forth between the A101 and A201, assuming, again, you're using an A101. But that Article 9 can list anything that the parties want. It can list, your digital data documents, if you have agreements there, it can list you know, sustainable objectives or anything that might be incorporated into this project. So you might have hard language in the A201, but also then tying that back and forth between the A101, which is, it again lists the contract documents up in Article 1, 2, but also down in Article 9, you can amend that. So it can get very complicated very quickly, but again, I do think that's important to understand. It's sort of the backbone of the contractor's obligations, and it's that trigger point to show what the contractor must do. So very important to understand.
Yep, absolutely.
If you have additional questions, you can contact us at aicontracts.org/learn just for some general information, some more of these types of videos, articles, webinars, etc. If you have questions or comments about the content of our agreements, you can use those two pieces of contact information listed on the middle of the screen. And if you have questions about our software, downloading documents, etc., you can use the two pieces of contact information listed at the bottom of your screen. And if you like this video, you can feel free to check out our YouTube channel, subscribe, and if you want to get notified when we update a new one, you can click the bell icon. Thanks very much.